Hey, welcome back, everyone, and thank you for joining me once again in Manny School of Arts. In our last video, we were looking at how to draw the eyes from different points of view, single eyes, and I promised you guys that we were also going to be learning how to use them together so that we can put them in the correct perspective when we are working with the Loomis head. So that is what our focus is going to be for this video. By the end of the lesson, you should be able to place the eyes in perspective to the correct size and the correct angle of the Loomis head.
All right. So before we get started drawing on these eyes, let's take a quick look at the skull. This is a front view, of course, and this is a side view right here. And what we're going to try to focus on is what is called a three-quarter view. So anything in between a front view and a side view is considered a three-quarter view. Okay. So when we are drawing in three quarters, we have to introduce perspective. Now we have to remember that as the head turns and tilts, it moves as a unit. Now I know I'm stating the obvious, but so often I see students that they'll turn the head like so, but then they'll draw this part of it, the face of it, still from a front view. Okay, so you got to really think about as you start turning the head, you got to notice what's going to happen. So I'm turning it to my left, meaning that this part of the head is starting to look smaller, start to appear smaller because of the rules of perspective, where the side of the head is starting to appear bigger. The more I turn it, the smaller the front part will look and the bigger this side will look. Also, there's a tremendous amount of overlapping that's going to happen. Okay, so we're looking at the brow ridges, we're looking at the glabella, we're looking at the bridge of the nose. All of those things will affect how the eyes are going to look when we put them in perspective. It's also going to affect the tear ducts and the eyelids, the upper and lower eyelids as well. So all of those things, when you are drawing a face and you're drawing it in perspective or in a three-quarter view, all of those things have to be taken into account because we have to adjust all of the angles and all of the curves in order to make it work.
Before we begin drawing the eyes, let's take a look at some of the more common mistakes that I've seen through the years that students make when they are trying to draw the face in perspective. The first one is they tend to make the eyes too flat. So they get the angle correct, but then they just draw them flat. They don't give any dimension or any mass to them. So they're not three-dimensional. The second thing is they often use the same measurements as you do for the front. So when you take the measurements from a front view, we know that the distance between the two eyes is about the same. However, when you put the face in perspective, those measurements no longer apply. You have to change them depending on how much of an angle you have. The one that I think is the more perplexing one is they'll put the face in perspective, but then they'll draw two different points of view of the eyes. Um, in this case, they have the front view here and then three-quarter view on this one. So it throws, even though they're drawn well individually, they don't look like they belong together. In order to correct some of these mistakes, I have two pieces of advice for you. First of all, you want to really learn how to draw a basic cube from any angle, and you want to do it in two-point perspective. One-point perspective is great when you're doing the front view, but when you start turning the head or tilting the head, you really should switch to two-point perspective. Okay. And number two, get yourself a lot of different references. Make sure that the references are from three-quarter views. You want to look at as many different angles as you can. So you want to look at males, females, young, old, different races. Um, and then just take a look at how the features around the eyes are affecting the way the eye looks. All right, let's take a quick look at drawing boxes in perspective, and we're talking about a cube because the upper portion of the human head fits into a cube from the top up to about where the base of the nose is. So when Andrew Loomis was talking about this, this represents the side, this represents the front. So if you're drawing a straight on or a side profile, this is pretty straightforward. You can work with a box and then add the lower part down here. However, when you start working in perspective, when you start turning the head, then you're going to notice that you have to change both of these sides right here. So as I turn it to my left, you can see that this side is starting to get a little bit smaller and this side starts to get a little bit bigger. When you get to the exact center, right about there, that's the only time that both these sides will be the same size. Okay? If I continue going, now this is starting to get even smaller, and this side starts to get bigger until eventually you get to that front view again. So when you place the eyes in perspective as a pair, you got to take those things into consideration as well. So here I'm using cubes to represent the location of the eyes, and I'm doing it in 2 point perspective. And you can see that this is so far away that you can't even see that second point. But the point I'm trying to make is this. You can see that this first eye here, which is the one that's closest to us, is measuring about 1 3/4. But then the space in between the eyes is only about 1 1/2. And then the second eye, it's only about 1 1/4. So what that's telling you is because this eye is further away than this one to the viewer, this eye has to look a little bit smaller. And you don't have to get deep into the rules of perspective to figure this out, but you need to have that understanding so that you don't put the eyes too far apart, like in the example I showed you earlier. Now, the beauty of working with the Loomis method is that Andrew Loomis has actually shown you how to do that without getting too involved with the rules of perspective. So you start off with a circle, then you draw your oval that's going to represent the side of the face that you want to see. Okay, so in this case, we're looking at the right side. Now, the important part is this. You want to make sure that this line here tells you whether it's tilting up or down. And then when you come across, make sure that it appears like a 90 degree. Okay, and then do the same thing with these right here. So if you really think about it, come up a little bit here. When you bring this at this angle, then you come across, and then you cut off this side, you're basically left with that cube. Oops. You're basically left with the cube that's in perspective, kind of like this. Okay, next we need to establish that center line. Now remember, it's in perspective, so this side, because we're looking at more of this side of the face, will look a little bit bigger than this side. So I'm going to estimate where that is, and then I'm going to double this distance here, and that will be the chin. Okay. Now, the focus of this video is the eyes, so let's start working on those things right here. First thing you want to do is establish where the glabella is going to be, and that's that keystone right about here, and then it goes up at an angle, and then this is where the bridge of the nose is going to be. Okay. Now, we're going to use that to figure out the location of the eye cavity. Now you can tell already that this one looks a little bit smaller than this one right here, which is what we're looking for. A common mistake that I see students do is they'll draw the eyeball too small. And then when they start adding in the upper and the lower eyelids, then the whole thing becomes tiny. Keep in mind that the eyeball measures, the human eyeball measures right about 1 inch, but we only see about a third of that. Okay? The rest of it is covered. So you got to make sure that you draw these pretty big. They fill up quite a bit of this cavity. Like this one could be a little bit bigger. Next thing you need to establish is where the tear ducts are going to go. Remember that the tear ducts are not in the middle; they're below center. Okay, how low below center? It varies from person to person, but I'm going to put it for this particular one. I'm going to put it right there. And the tear ducts face the nose, and they kind of point downwards, like so. The lower lids only cover this much of the eyeball right here. Okay, and that makes the upper part of the lid, which covers a lot more, look so much bigger. Okay, so make sure that you feel like it's curving around, like so. Two. Remember we talked about that on the last video. So we're going 1, 2, but it's got a curve, right? Because we're going around a sphere. Okay. And then for the upper part, we want to go 1, 2, curve it, right? Because you're going around the sphere. And then 3. And make sure you go past this little section right here, right? Because the upper eyelid overlaps the bottom lid. Okay. Now you want to estimate where the other side is and kind of, for the most part, repeat the process. Now, this particular face is almost a straight on view. So the changes that you see in the eyes are going to be subtle. As you turn the face more and more, you're going to see that some of those changes become a little bit more pronounced. Okay? Make sure that you show the thickness of the upper and lower lids for this angle, especially since we're looking at it this way. You're probably going to see a little bit more of this right here on the right side. And then remember that the eyelid, the crease of the eyelid is up here somewhere. Now, don't worry that the eyes are not perfectly symmetrical. They're not going to be. Even when you look at a front view, they're not going to be. But when you put it in perspective, they're definitely not going to be. They're bilateral, right? Because you have eyes on each side of center. But because of the perspective, you're going to have to change that the way that they look. All right, so let's look at the opposite angle. So this time we can see the left side of the head and then the face. So we're going to be angling this part here. Here's the brow ridge. So let's angle this way. And then let's establish the spacing of the eyes. Now remember, the side that's closer to you is going to look bigger. So this side is going to look a little bit bigger than this. Okay. And then the spacing in the middle should be a little bit smaller than this, and a little bit bigger than that. So you have to kind of play with it a little bit. Here's the center line, but we know that the nose is going to go this way. So let's get that keystone place in there. And then from that centerpiece, let's kind of like have an idea which way the nose is going. Okay. Now, take this here, turn it this way a little bit. Now, remember when we talked last time that the eyes are embedded back into the head a little bit. So make sure that you keep this angle here. It's very easy to take this too far out, which changes the angle of the eye. So when you bring this out this way a little bit, don't bring it out too far, because then it'll look like the eye will be changing in the direction. And then this drops a little bit here. And you do the same thing on the other side. So drop it this way, drop it this way, not too much. Like so. Now you got to get the ball in there, the eyeball. Now, because we're looking at it from this angle, the eyeball is going to get close to this wall right here. So let's get it in there and get it fairly big. If you need to come across and add additional guidelines, you may do so. Now the tear duct's going to be here, right? So we know that this piece is all going this way. And the tear duct's going to be like right here, roughly. Then bring it around. Double it up on the bottom. On this side, you're not going to see it, but you need to know where it is. It's going to be right about there. And then it's going to curl up. Then for the top part, you're going to go 1, 2, 3. Make sure that the eye that's closer to you is the bigger one. So in this case, this eye looks a little too small. So I'm going to go ahead and make my adjustment. And then typically, I'll make the adjustments before I erase. You'll notice that in none of these drawings that I'm doing, um, I'm not concerned about the pupil and the iris. Okay, those are easy to put in. But what I am concerned about is making sure that the structure of the eye looks correct when it's in perspective. So I would recommend, especially if you're struggling with the eyes, that you actually practice drawing them like you would a statue. And we talked about that on the last video, but that way you can focus on the eyelids, the tear ducts, and all of that. All right, so let's take a look at this angle that is almost at a side view, almost at a profile. So let's go ahead and begin by bringing this in. And it's going to come all the way to here. Now here's our center line. So we have to kind of figure out where this part of this eye is going to be. The other side, hardly noticeable at all, right? Because the nose is going to be blocking that. So I'm going to focus on what's happening on this side and then adjust that side. But I'm thinking it's probably going to be about there. Now, the glabella on this one is probably going to look more like this. Okay. And then the nose, the center of the nose, just going to kind of put that out there so that we can see the angle of the face. Now, this has to come back quite a bit because now we're looking at it more from a side view. Not quite a side view, but pretty darn close. Then it's going to drop down like this. And then it's going to come back like so. Now, kind of important, I got to make sure that this stays in front of this, right? Because of that angle. The eye has to sit back a little bit. And we're going to see this so we can kind of get an idea of where that cheek's going to be. Okay. On the other side, you're not going to see a whole lot. So it'll look kind of like this. And as you're going to see here, the eyeball is going to overlap some of this, so you won't see much of this at all. Okay. Now let's get that eyeball in there. Because we're looking at it pretty severe, this eyeball, there's a very good chance that it's actually going to touch, perhaps even overlap the cavity on the right side here. On the other side, you might see this. Because the tear duct is almost at a now, because the drawing is almost at a side view, you're not going to see much of the tear duct. It's going to be like here somewhere. going to be kind of pointing down like this. And then this will curl this way. Okay. For the top, you're not going to see this part of the eyelid. Okay. You're going to see this part like so. And it's going to go past the eyeball just a little bit. And then it's going to go back. And then the rest of this is the socket, right? So it's going in, out, and then the eyeball. Okay. This will come this way, right? Because we know that the cheek is going to start to come this way. On the other side, if you can see anything at all, it'll just be something like this. That's about it. Okay. Then we can see the brow ridge. It's going to be more pronounced because we're looking at it from the side view, almost a side view, not quite a side view, but pretty darn close. And then the forehead will go that way. Now, when we add the top of the nose, you can see how much of the eye is blocking the nose or overlapping the nose. And then here you can see how much of the nose is overlapping the eye. So again, when you are drawing or adding the eyes onto a face is turned, you really, really, really have to use perspective. All right, so now let's look at a little bit more extreme angle where the face is not only turned, but is also tilted upwards. So I've taken a minute and just like before, I found the glabella and I found the eye sockets and kind of establish where all of that's going to be. Okay. Now, let's get that eyeball in there. Nice and big. And match them up. And because of this little overlap, this eyeball is going to get super close to the nose. Now let's establish where the tear duct's going to go. So in this case, it's going to be right about here. Not really going to see that one much. Now, because the face is tilted, when I put this little piece in right here, chances are I'm not really going to see the thickness of this lid. And notice that it's a little bit higher than here. Okay, so it's about here. So you're looking at something like this. Okay. Now, because the face is tilted, in this case, you're actually going to see a lot of this part right here, the underside of here. And it's going to look severe. It's going to drop down quite a bit, right? Because we're looking up. So that means this cross contour line, you can think of it that way, it's going to drop down quite a bit. And because we're looking up at the face, you are definitely going to see the thickness of the upper lid, especially on the right side, like so. You may not see much here. Okay? And then this will go up. The lid is going to be back here somewhere. And then there's the socket, the remainder of the socket. On the opposite side, you're not going to see as much here. So imagine this here, and then it'll go past the eyeball, just like so, just a little bit. This goes around this way, This goes around the other way. This comes down, and you have to imagine where it would hook to the tear duct, which you can't see because of the placement of the nose. And then this would go up this way, and there you go. Okay. So very important that as you are turning the face or tilting the face, that you are adjusting the angle of the glabella, the nose, the upper lid, the lower lid, and the eye sockets. Okay? If you don't do that, you're going to keep making the same mistakes as I showed you at the beginning of the lesson. All right, so to recap, basically what you want to make sure that you do is you want to make sure that you practice drawing the eyes from multiple points of view in perspective, and you want to make sure that you practice them very generically. Um, don't worry too much about the pupils or the irises, just try to get the structure to look right in 3D. Once you've done that and you've practiced and you've gotten the spacing right and the perspective right, then you can move on to practicing working on individual eyes from references. Remember that everybody's eyes are different, so there are a lot of little subtleties that you have to take into account. But none of that will make any sense until you get the structure placed in perspective with the proper placing. All right. Hopefully this helps. If you have any questions or if you need clarification, please let me know in the comments below and I will help you out. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.